Welcome to the 2018 to 2019 NCFCA webinar series. The goal of NCFCA webinars is to facilitate a platform where thought leaders and subject matter experts can provide insight on topics relevant to current debate resolutions and speech events. Our desire is to provide a platform that encourages mentorship, real-life application, and competitive excellence. Our intention for this webinar is to help provide educational context for the debate topic from our guest speaker's specific area of expertise. Please keep this framework in mind as you craft your questions and take advantage of the fact that you have an opportunity to interact with someone who can provide subject matter expertise regarding the debate topic of the United States federal government's foreign policy towards international terrorism. The format of this evening's webinar will begin with a 30-minute presentation from our guest speaker, John Mueller. This 30-minute presentation will be followed by a giveaway sponsored by the Bill of Rights Institute. And to tell you just a little bit about the Bill of Rights Institute, it is an educational nonprofit located just outside Washington, D.C. The Bill of Rights Institute engages, educates, and empowers individuals with a passion for the freedom and opportunity that exist in a free society. They envision a society in which all individuals enjoy life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness so that students can engage with and champion these rights for themselves and others. During this giveaway, we will be providing a book actually co-authored by our guest speaker along with Mark Stewart. This book pertains to the topic of our TP debate resolution this year, and it is titled Chasing Ghosts, the Policing of Terrorism. So we will be giving that book away to our students that demonstrate great engagement by submitting questions through the Q&A option available at the bottom of your screen. So with that, please remember to submit questions. We will follow the giveaway with a 15-minute live Q&A. And during that time, our NCFCA host, Kim Cromer, and our guest speaker, John Mueller, will have a conversation based on the questions that you have submitted. So at this point, it's my honor to invite Kim to join us here on screen as I introduce her to you this evening, and she will subsequently introduce Mr. Mueller to all of you. So Kim Cromer and her husband of nearly 25 years, Jeff, and their 3 daughters began their NCFCA journey in 2007. Since that time, they've lived in 4 different NCFCA regions and graduated all of their girls from high school. Kim holds a master's in human nutrition from Clemson University and taught as an adjunct professor at several community colleges and as a high school science teacher. This teaching experience crossed over into NCFCA leadership, where she has now served as regional director, director of forensics, and now executive director. So with that, I'm excited to turn this over to Kim as she introduces our guest speaker.
Thank you, Natalia. We're excited to have you all with us here tonight to hear from our guest speaker. John Mueller is a senior fellow at the Cato Institute. He's also a member of the Political Science Department and senior research scientist with the Mershon Center for International Security Studies at Ohio State University. A leading expert on terrorism and particularly on the reactions or overreactions, as it may be, often inspires. He is the co-author with Mark Stewart, the book that we are giving away tonight called Chasing Ghosts, the Policing of Terrorism. That was published by Oxford University Press in 2016. He and Mr. Stewart co-authored a second book called Terror, Security, and Money, Balancing the Risk, Benefits, and Cost of Homeland Security. That book was published in 2011. And he's done several other books, including Overblown, How Politicians and the Terrorism Industry Inflate National Security Threats and Why We Believe Them, as well as Atomic Obsession, Nuclear Alarmism from Hiroshima to Al-Qaeda. He's the editor of Terrorism Since 9/11, The American Cases, with Christopher A. Preble, A Dangerous World, Threat Perception, and U.S. National Security. So he's been very busy as he has spent some time there with the Cato Institute. So welcome tonight to our presentation. Dr. Mueller, we are excited to hear from you.
Okay, thanks very much. It's nice to be here. This is the first time I had to make my house into a TV studio, so the picture may not be exactly ideal. So you want to just close your eyes and do the same thing. I'd like to basically deal with three issues, and then we can have a question and answer period. One is trying to deal with the degree to which terrorism presents a threat. The second, dealing with the issue of why the United States has been targeted. And the third, basically looking at foreign policy the way it exists now or might exist. I think a good place to begin in the first section is trying to get sort of a quantitative handle on the issue of terrorism. And I should probably begin with the biggest quantity, which is 9/11. 9/11 was obviously a horrific event and a horrific tragedy. But in terms of terrorism, it was way off the charts, essentially. If you look at the history of terrorism, inside war zones, outside war zones, before 9/11, after 9/11, there's been essentially no attacks, or virtually no attacks, that were even 1/10 as destructive as 9/11. So it was then an extreme outlier, extreme case, and it remains so to the present day. So, and generally speaking, generalizing very much from that perspective, from that one event, is probably not a good idea. The other numbers are much smaller. The most important thing, as far as Americans are concerned, is the degree to which Americans have been killed by Islamist terrorists since 9/11. And the number that have been killed is about 6 per year. Obviously, that's 6 too many, but it's an extraordinarily small number. By contrast, lightning kills 40 or 35 or 40 people each year. Automobiles, of course, kill 20 or 30,000, and we won't even go into cancer and other things. So as a hazard, basically, it has not really been all that significant. I once asked, in fact, a friend of mine who's very high up in the National Institutes of Health, if you had a disease that killed 6 people a year, how much money would you spend trying to eradicate it? And he looked at me like I was crazy. I mean, obviously they have diseases that kill hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, and millions ultimately. And they much would rather put their money at hazards that are much more significant. The chance in the United States of being killed by a terrorist since 9/11, including 9/11, including 9/11, in the count is about 1 in 4 million per year. Your chance, if you only deal with the years since 9/11, is about 1 in 50 million or so. So as a danger, it's really pretty limited. You also get that perspective when you sort of look at Al-Qaeda, what basically Al-Qaeda has been doing since 9/11. For the most part, a good way of putting it is it's somewhat similar to Lee Harvey Oswald, the guy who killed John Kennedy, a fundamentally trivial entity that got horribly lucky once. The amount of terrorism that the 9/11 that the Al-Qaeda has been able to do since 9/11 has been extremely limited. They've had a few attacks here and there. They've had 2 attempts to try to the shoe bomber and a liquid bomb spot out of London to try to do something in or going to the United States. Both of those failed miserably. And in general, their record is one of failure. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who's sometimes considered to be the 9/11 genius or mastermind, has had almost no other successes through his whole career. He's had a lot of ideas, but he's never been able to pull off another attack. That doesn't discount from the one time they got horribly lucky any more than this discounts from Lee Harvey Oswald's time when he was able to kill the president. Also, he had a lot of luck going on his side. But nonetheless, that should be basically kept in context. And it seems to me that newspapers and the media, every time they report on terrorism, should bring that up, saying, that doesn't mean that terrorism is a terrible thing and someone shoots up a bunch of people in a nightclub in Orlando, Florida. It certainly needs to be covered. But at the same time, what should be there somewhere in the story is, by the way, your chance of being killed by a terrorist at present rates are about 1 in 4 million, or since 9/11, 1 in 50 million. So basically what we're dealing with is something that's not really all that significant, and in many respects, terrorism is going into substantial decline. There is, and what holds for the United States also largely holds for other countries in the developed world. They too have casualty rates about the ones of the United States, a few per year since 9/11. In fact, in Europe, there's far, far more people killed by terrorists in the 60s and 70s than since 9/11. So that should be kept in context. The other thing is that there is a fair amount of terrorism in war zones. But what's happened is since 9/11, people who had previously been considered to be insurgents are now considered to be terrorists. So the rate of terrorism seems to have gone up because what had previously been insurgencies are now labeled frequently terrorism. A good case in point is the attacks by the ISIS, the Islamic State. That's clearly an insurgent group. It holds land. It attacks the military. It has weaponry. And in the previous case, it would not be called terrorists. It would be called insurgents.
Hey, John. I'm sorry to interrupt you just briefly. We're getting a few comments here that your audio is a little choppy. And so I'm wondering if the microphone on your headphones might be hitting your shirt collar. Could you try?
I don't have a microphone. I'm using the computer microphone.
Okay. So could we maybe try without the headphones and see if that helps?
Should I unplug them, you mean?
Yes. Sorry to switch that.
Okay, they're unplugged now. Now I can't hear you.
Okay.
Oh, now you're okay now.
Okay. Participants, could you let us know if this sound is better? John, do you mind talking a little bit?
Or coughing, as the case may be. Yes, this is John Mueller trying to talk about terrorism.
Okay.
Columbus, Ohio.
Let's see if this is a little better. Okay. One person said, yes, that is better. So that's good news.
Okay.
Seems to sound the same, though, for several other people. Okay. Well, I think it seems to have resolved it for a couple of people here. So let's go ahead and continue on. Thank you. And I apologize for that.
Okay, would it help if I got closer to the computer?
Could you test that?
Yeah. How's this? Is that any better if I'm up closer?
That sounds better on my end.
Okay, well, I can try that.
Okay. Could you try turning the volume down on your computer just a little bit? I still want you to be able to hear us, so don't turn it down too much.
Sure, this is a new computer, so
I know, we're just helping you break it in.
Right.
Use all the functions.
Okay, I've gotten, I've lowered it to like 70, 80%, something like that.
Okay. Yeah, this actually sounds great. And it definitely sounds better when you're closer to the computer.
Okay.
Okay, well, thank you so much.
Okay. Let me make a few other points with respect to the threat that Al-Qaeda or terrorism presents. One argument would be that the reason that the events there's so little terrorism or doing such little damage is that the security measures are so great. I've looked at that pretty carefully, and there's a big section in Chasing Ghosts on that in one of the early chapters. And what you got is there's like about 125 cases since 9/11. Which I've done in this case study book, we can look up, which is available free online. The bad news is that the book is 1,065 pages, but you know, you can work with that. And there's about, they say about 125 cases, and there's something like 27 cases in which the terrorist has actually carried out an attack of some sort, and that's resulted in in 10 cases, they've actually killed somebody, and that's how we get the 6 people killed per year since 9/11. So we know what basically these guys have done, the 125 cases, the ones that have actually done something. So the question would be that if these other guys had not been caught, how much damage would they do? Well, if you look at the casebook, what you'll find is that the competence of these guys is extraordinarily limited. They speak they spout out a lot, they bloviate a lot, but they don't seem to have very much in the way of coherent plans overall. They're mostly caught by the FBI because they advertise their plans on Facebook, which is not the most brilliant way to remain out of sight. And the idea that they could get their act together to kill very many people is low. And so when you look at them, and you can look at them yourself and make up your own mind, it's hard to see how they could be, even if they were free to do anything, that they would do very much. But it might be higher. Instead of 6 people a year, you might get 12 or 15 people a year. Still an extraordinarily small number. And the other argument is that the security measures have deterred people from attacking. This argument strikes me as being extraordinarily unlikely. What happens is that security measures have gotten really good in some places, so that if you want to take down an airplane or attack on a military base as a terrorist, you're not likely to be successful. But even though those targets are very hard to get, there's a million other targets. It replaces a congregation, people on the street, people like in that nightclub that was shot up in Orlando, for example. And so there's a million things terrorists could do if they really wanted to, and they get plenty of headlines. They just can't take down airplanes, and they basically haven't done so. That sort of suggests, therefore, that they're not they basically substantially don't exist in many respects. Okay, let me turn to my second point, which is the issue of why do they attack us? The argument is that they attack us because they don't like our values. But almost anybody who's looked at this very seriously, and I'd recommend very strongly, there's sections in Chasing Ghosts on this as well, but somebody who's done an extraordinarily large amount of work on this, a guy named Mark Sageman. And he's sort of the leader in saying, no, they do it because of American foreign policy. And what has happened is in the Middle East. So what they say, and they say it repeatedly, what we're trying to do is defend our faith and our people and our way of life from the American incursions. And this is the case even before 9/11. Now, when the attack on 9/11 was justified because there were American troops in Saudi Arabia, because the United States was supporting Israel and various groups, various tyrant regimes within the Middle East, and because they were putting sanctions on in Iraq, which were killing lots of people. By some estimates, in the hundreds of thousands of people died from the sanctions. So they're trying to get back at that. So overall, it's the problem is not that they want to destroy democracy in the United States, not they want to take over, but they basically they see themselves as defending Islam. Very few people actually engage in this, and so terrorists, I've already given you the numbers. So consequently, it's not clear that it makes that it's not that everybody is like that by any means. But insofar as these combatants are fighting, that's what they say. They say it repeatedly. They don't care about whether the United States is democratic or not. It's not a anti-crusade or anything to convert everybody to Islam. It's basically what they see as defense of an attack on them. So I'm sort of running out of time here, so let me move to the final issue about foreign policy, which I think is the main subject of your debate. In some respects, I think what you ought to take into consideration is the Middle East really all that important to the United States? Does it really need to be there to pacify things? In many respects, the Middle East is of very limited value to the United States. It used to be more important because of oil, but much of that dependence has gone away. It does have a sentimental interest, certainly in the fate of Israel, but as is extremely clear, Israel is extraordinarily capable of taking care of itself. So you can continue supporting Israel, but you don't have to have troops there. It should also be pointed out that efforts to try to deal with terrorism in the Middle East in this century, since 9/11, have been a cosmic disaster, a fiasco. And this doesn't get talked about enough. I mean, everybody knows it's going well in both Iraq and in particularly in Afghanistan now. But the result of the American invasions of those two countries has been that well over 100,000 Muslims have been killed, sometimes by each other in the civil wars that have come out, but nonetheless, well over 100,000. Indeed, more people have been killed by those attacks since 9/11 than perished at Hiroshima and Nagasaki combined. So it seems to me keeping that in mind is important. And the issue is, can the United States, given this unbelievably horrible record of failure in the Middle East, can it do anything to straighten out the Middle East? It seems to be extremely bad at it. They couldn't even train the Iraqi army. The United States spent $20 billion creating this army in Iraq, which is supposed to defend the central place, to defend the country. It is riddled with massive amount of corruption. There's a technique where you can pay, if you pay your commanding officer half your salary, you don't have to show up. Many people never show up, period. So consequently, we got a situation in which we got this army is sitting there, and when ISIS attacked in 2014 with a relatively small number of troops, the Iraqi army, trained at the cost of $20 billion, simply faded away. Eventually, ISIS was so vicious that they were able to get their act together, and with the help of the Americans, able to put it down. But mostly, ISIS was self-defeating. Its policies were so unbelievably stupid that it was destined to fall apart, even though it created a large amount of alarm. Sorry about the cough. The other area would be in Afghanistan, where it's not clear that we even know what we're doing. But the United States went into Afghanistan to get al-Qaeda. The Taliban had been harboring al-Qaeda. The result, however, after initial success, has been the longest war the United States has ever been involved with, and it seems to be basically going nowhere. The arguments currently, if you ask people, why are we in Afghanistan? By far the most important one that comes up is because we want to prevent another 9/11. We don't want it to become a safe haven for terrorists, as it was more or less for al-Qaeda before 9/11. And the argument basically doesn't hold much water. To begin with, the Taliban, which was the controlling agency in Afghanistan when the United States attacked in 2001, was not getting very along with their guests. Osama bin Laden simply showed up in 1996 in Afghanistan, and he was greeted and, if you want to stay here and live with your children and your wives, fine. But don't do terrorism. And don't even issue statements. That's the deal. But he continued to do it anyway. And the most important thing, obviously, was the event was 9/11, which caused the attack on the Taliban. So if they win in Afghanistan, they're extremely unlikely to want to bring al-Qaeda back. Secondly, al-Qaeda probably wouldn't want to go back. The al-Qaeda itself is reduced to maybe 100, 200 people roaming around in Pakistan, the al-Qaeda Central. And so in time, they would, if they were invited even to come back to Afghanistan, which I think is extremely unlikely, what would happen would be that they'd probably decide that it's not a very good idea. We got more safety here in Pakistan than we did in Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, if they did come back, once again, they'd be subject to attack by the United States, which wouldn't care in the least about the fact that the Taliban were in the way. Currently, to attack them in Pakistan, to attack al-Qaeda in Pakistan, means you have to sort of pay attention to what the Pakistanis think. That would not be the case if the issue were dealing with sending in commandos or sending in drones to hit al-Qaeda within Afghanistan. So it's extremely unlikely, it seems to me, that al-Qaeda would even want to come back to there. And the whole idea is that they need a safe haven in order to plan attacks is also nonsense. They may need a safe haven, but it can be an apartment in Hamburg. Germany, which was where the 9/11 attack was put together. So the idea that if the Taliban comes back in Afghanistan, that it'll suddenly become a safe haven for terrorists and they'll have other 9/11s is, I think, just preposterous. I've already talked about the fact that even with that, they haven't remotely been able, nor has anybody else, what happened on 9/11. It's then the extreme outlier. So let me just check my notes here. If there's anything else I want to add on that. No, I think that pretty well covers it. Let me sort of summarize. It seems to me that basically that the United States has had a really terrible record of failure in the Middle East, that it should be considering withdrawing if it possibly can. In the case of the Taliban, in the case of Afghanistan, what could logically be would be something like Vietnam. It's a strange thing to say in some respects, but in Vietnam, the United States agreed to get out with a ceasefire in place. And it seems like something like that might work in Afghanistan. Instead of continuing to support the unbelievably corrupt government that's there, it would, and unless you engage in fighting at all, it would basically be pushing back, getting a ceasefire in place, and then letting things fall where they may within Afghanistan. So it would seem to be that there are alternatives to what we're doing now that we ought to really consider. Okay, and my half hour I think is up, so let me stop there and see how you can, if there are comments, questions, expressions of outrage, whatever, I'm ready. Thank you.
Thank you, John, so much. We're going to go ahead and move into our giveaway just briefly to give students a chance to submit a few more questions. We definitely have a lot of questions coming in here. So thank you again for your presentation this evening. So the giveaway tonight is going to go to our 2 students who have demonstrated excellent engagement by submitting questions. And those 2 students for this evening are going to be Emma Beagle and Juliana. I'm probably not going to get this correctly, but is it Shepner? Juliana Shepner and Emma Beagle. We will be sending you a copy of John Mueller's book. So thank you again for submitting questions this evening. Just as a brief reminder of some upcoming events and products that are available. Again, if you haven't already accessed the NCFCA Comprehensive Guide to Policy Debate, that is available. There is a coach, a student or competitors, and then parents version of that to equip you in your studies for the debate topic this year. And you can access this through the NCFCA website under resources. So in addition to that, quick reminder, we still have more webinars coming up in our October webinar series. The next team policy webinar will be hosted by Patrick Henry College, and that will be on October the 22nd at 6 p.m. Central. Our guest speaker for that webinar will be Colonel Middleton, and he will be providing some insight on the team policy topic as well. So if you haven't registered already, please make sure to sign up for that event. And with that, we will move into the live Q&A. So I've seen even more questions coming in here as we did the giveaway and the quick product highlight. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Kim and John.
Great. Thank you very much, Natalia. John, thank you so much for that helpful segment on international terrorism. As Natalia mentioned, the students have been asking lots of questions the whole time. So I will start and just let you respond to these as you will. What needs to change with our foreign policy to decrease the amount of tension in the Middle East?
Well, the United States, in many respects, is the cause of the tension. It basically has committed naked aggression in 2 countries. They basically helped foster this terrible civil war in Syria. And, after nearly 20 years of almost unmitigated failure, it may be that it's time for the United States to withdraw from the area, pull back from the area, and let somebody else have a chance. Maybe let Costa Rica or something do it. The United States did come in and help a lot with ISIS. As I mentioned, ISIS was really pretty horrible and mostly defeated itself with its ludicrously vicious policy, and ludicrous in the sense that it's self-defeating.
Okay.
The United States helped with coordination on that, but was not actually running the thing. There's lots of problems in all those countries, and it basically has to be for the people there to get their act together. The main problem in Iraq would be basically getting Sunnis and Shia and Kurds and others to work together. And I think there's some possibility this will work since they're so exhausted by this catastrophic war that's been going on since 2003.
Right.
And now the new thing with ISIS. So I think there's some possibility. In the case of Syria, it seems to me, I did a piece on this and also one on Pakistan in National Interest a few months ago. If you want to look it up, nationalinterest.org. It's sort of, in the case of, I told you basically my peace plan for Afghanistan, the one which basically the United States saying we'll get out, they'll continue possibly to support financially the government. In the case of Syria, it just seems that Assad has won. And as James Dobbins of the Rand Corporation put it 4 years ago, virtually anything is better than this continued civil war. And the best thing probably would be to try to work with Assad, keep his excesses under some degree of control, and try to establish a degree of peace under his authoritarian dictatorship.
Mm-hmm.
Fortunately, the war, it seems to me, has been lost, and trying to put together the rebels is a hopeless enterprise.
Okay. Along that line, do you think that educating and empowering the communities where these would-be terrorists come from would be helpful as a tactic, maybe in addition to withdrawing our troops, John?
Well, it's hard to see. Mostly the chief motivation has been terrorism, has been to oppose the American invaders. So the minute American invaders go away, they won't have that motivation. The main problem would be that, as what's happened in Libya, another brilliant failure of the United States, in that case with its close allies, the British and the French, is that after they get out or leave, that the whole country would devolve into civil war. And it could be really vicious. That has happened previously when the Soviets were forced out in the 1990s in Afghanistan. It's still going on, of course, in Afghanistan, and the danger of civil war breaking out in Iraq is certainly high. And of course, there is a civil war going on still in Syria, as well as in Libya. So the thing too is basically there aren't any solutions to this, and the United States, insofar as it tried to provide solutions, has to admit to itself, it seems to me, that the United States the policy of the United States has made it worse. That is to say, put it really bluntly and unpleasantly, the Iraqis would have been better if they could have stayed under the disaster, the horrible dictatorship of Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein is better than the American war. The Afghans, the Taliban is a horrible, fanatical regime, but at least it provided a certain amount of peace and stability. And the Afghans, I think, would have been better if they could have been allowed to stay under that regime, even though both those regimes I have, extreme contempt for. Nonetheless, the United States, what it did was made it even worse. And it just seems to me that one should, after a long period of failure, saying we really screwed up. We screwed up repeatedly. We made things worse. Maybe we are the problem. The United States, unfortunately, is not the only problem. And potentially make an extraordinary civil war is still possible in those places. Though generally, we may be past the worst part of this, particularly getting rid of ISIS.
Okay. So, John, you referred to in your talk about the sanctions on Iraq in 2001 that killed hundreds of thousands of people. Would you generally say that sanctions are a bad idea as a response to terrorism?
Yeah, you have to be careful with it. I used to be really quite enthusiastic about sanctions, particularly after the end of the Cold War. And they do have a way of concentrating the mind of the people sanctioned. But they don't have a very good record for success. A few cases there has been, perhaps in South Africa, for example, a few decades ago. But mostly they aren't very successful, and they hurt. And you have, if you're going to do them, you have to make sure you know who's being hurt, and it frequently is the ordinary people. Now, I talked before about, let me embellish this. I talked before about the sanctions and the things you brought up, the sanctions on Iraq in the 1990s. Madeleine Albright was asked on 60 Minutes, a very popular show in the 1990s. She was then representative of the United States at the United Nations, later was made Secretary of State. And Leslie Stahl, who interviewed Trump just recently on the same program, asked her an extraordinarily good question, which never was asked, as far as I know, of any other American leader during that period of time. He said, Madam Secretary, Madam Representative, we have heard that the sanctions on Iraq have killed, resulted in the death of 500,000 children. And then the question was, do you think it's worth it? It's not that the sanctions have done nothing, but the question is, that's the cost. And Madeleine Albright said, yes, we think it's worth it. Now, if you're an Arab, that picked up, I did the LexisNexis search to see if anybody, we got one of the top foreign policy leaders of the United States saying, without arguing about the numbers were inflated. The numbers are not really that high, it turns out. Nonetheless, she didn't argue with the numbers, 500,000. You got the top foreign policy official, one of the top foreign policy officials, saying on national television that our policies have resulted in the death of 500,000 children, and it's been worth it. When she explained what it was worth, she pointed out that Saddam Hussein had recognized Kuwait, which he later unrecognized, and that it had slowed down his weapons program some. And so if you think 500,000 dead children is worth that, then I suppose her statement makes some sense. That got picked up by basically nobody in the United States. That outrage that anybody could even say that, but it got up a lot in the Middle East, and that kind of fatuous nonsense horror by American officials is something that really rubs people the wrong way. Obama has said we are the one indispensable nation, implying that all other nations are dispensable. That doesn't go down too well either. And the fatuousness that comes out of the out of the Trump administration, I'll leave to another discussion. But the sanctions are a very clumsy tool, very carefully focused. They can have some effect sometimes. There's also a problem of secondary sanctions, like the ones now against Iran. They are not only sanctioning Iran, but they're also sanctioning our friends. So that, like these Western Europeans who want to stay in the agreement that Trump wants to get out of. And so what you need to do is, so what they're doing is trying to get out from under the American dollar, which could, for long term, be really bad for the United States as sort of the chief economic power and the most stable economic power in the world.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Wow. Very helpful. So what would you think about ending arms sales or using drone strikes as a response to international terrorism as well?
Well, that's sort of where things are going at the end of the Obama administration. It's mostly been continued in the Trump administration of basically not wanting to get involved in more of these wars. The United States public is, to say the least, very fed up with them, and to try to do something more focused overall. But it should be kept in mind that the terrorist threat is really very small. I mean, the point is, why do you need to wipe out something that kills 6 people a year in the United States? And if anything, that's going down, or in Western Europe. The drone strikes and other kinds of strikes are often counterproductive because they frequently miss, or they kill the wrong people, or they kill some of the right people you want to kill, but they also kill other people. So it's not clear that we have to chase terrorists everywhere they are. In some respects, what we're doing is fighting a war against a tactic. The number of terrorists in the Middle East who target the United States, or want to target the United States, and for that matter, Western Europe, is very small. Al Qaeda has that as a basic tenet, of course, overall. But even the other Al Qaeda groups, for example, the ones in Yemen, the ones in Iraq, the ones in Afghanistan, not currently, we don't have all that much connection with Al Qaeda Central anyway. Most of them are very much focused on local issues. They're not interested in killing people in Western Europe or the United States. The one exception to that is a few attempts by the group in the Al Qaeda group in Yemen, and those proved to be very failures. One was the underwear bomber, who was outfitted by what somebody called a master bomb builder, with a bomb that was too small to brought down the airliner, even if he could have brought it on. It exploded it, and he failed to do that. And they tried something else to blow up some transport airliners. Those failed as well. And that's just about the only efforts against the West from all these other Al Qaeda groups.
Mm-hmm. Okay, super helpful. Okay, so the next question that I'm seeing here is, what's the single best foreign policy reform, maybe I should caveat that, besides withdrawing troops, that the U.S. federal government could make towards international terrorism?
Well, in many respects, I suppose the bottom line, obviously a lot of people are going to disagree with this, is that terrorism isn't a big enough hazard to spend much effort dealing with. One of the things Mark Stewart and I have done is try to do cost-benefit analysis of the terrorism, counterterrorism in the United States and abroad. And the amount of money dealing with this incredibly limited hazard, and I've argued that even if the measures weren't there, nonetheless there would not be all that much more death. It would still be quite a limited hazard. They just fail enormously at a test. The United States spent well over $1 trillion on domestic counterterrorism since 9/11. And on the wars in the Middle East, it's several trillion, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 trillion, depending on how you calculate things. Mm-hmm. And of course, with extremely long-term costs because of the long-term injuries that will be plaguing the veterans for a long time. So it's not clear, from my standpoint, it isn't a problem, not very much. It isn't a threat. I don't say, when a guy, drives a truck onto a bicycle path in Manhattan last year, that was fun and games. That was a horrible thing, but it's very limited sort of threat, and maybe we should be spending our money on other things. Mm-hmm. Try to do in both those two books, plus a more recent one about airline security, is try to point out that the money being spent to save a very small number of people from terrorism would be much better spent on things that kill lots more people, such as better highways, better cars, more research on diseases that actually matter, and dealing with the opioid crisis, for example. So right. That's the kind of balance that should be given. The question is, it's a cost-benefit thing. The cost is extremely high. The hazard seems to be extremely low. And throwing that much money at it means you are basically losing lives because you're not spending the public safety and money on things that kill far more people.
Okay. Along the lines, you sort of mentioned, maybe redirecting the funds. Would you see cyber terrorism as a credible threat? And is that something that you would suggest maybe that we reallocate funds to?
Well, I don't think so overall. It's something I want to worry about. Mostly what cyber terrorism or cybersecurity involves is vandalism. And that, of course, businesses have to worry about that. People have been trying to rob banks ever since they're invented. And the cyber thing gives them another way thieves can try to steal money from banks. Cyber basically zero people at all. It's been disruptive. It's been a pain in the neck in some cases, but it's been mostly like vandalism. And so let me talk about that, particularly with respect to the election, something that really bothers me, that doesn't seem to bother anybody else. Basically, there's a whole lot of literature indicating that political campaigns don't really make very much difference, political science literature. There have been tons of campaigns, people spend tons of money on it, and it's very hard to see that campaigning, particularly campaign advertising, makes much difference. If interlopers are coming in and adding fake news to the fake news that's already there, most campaigns are wall-to-wall fake news, right? When the candidate, the incumbent, distorts his or her record, and the opponent does also distort it, except in a different way. It basically just adding more nonsense to the piles and piles of fake news that are campaigns anyway. So it doesn't strike me as being much of a threat to the democracy that's in the United States. Democracy consists of, basically, it's a very messy business. Campaigns are only a fairly small part of it in many respects. And adding more static to something that's already 90% static is not really all that harmful. In some respects, the laws against letting foreigners, if foreigners want to say how we should vote, let them say it. Let them pass out pamphlets if they want. If Americans are swayed by that, because they say, well, Belarus thinks I should vote for this guy, the mayor of the election, so I'm going to do that. Or Costa Rica does, or Canada does, and that's up to the voter. They're already getting barraged by tons of information urging to vote one way or the other, and you're having more stuff come in. If it comes from a source, if you happen to think that Costa Rica always gets it right, maybe you could use that. So it's not. It just strikes me as being not very significant a threat, and
Okay.
it's something you may want to work with. It also, by the way, one of the things that Dane fears of is that it would undermine American intelligence, security. A lot of classified material comes out, and we had these leaks like WikiLeaks and the Snowden revelations. And what's overwhelmingly impressive about the leaks that have come out is, why was that stuff classified? There's tons and tons of information coming out, but you say, well, this is embarrassing to somebody in the French, you're working in the French embassy in France. Well, you don't classify things because they might be embarrassing. You're supposed to do it because of national security is at risk. And it seems to be very little of the stuff that's classified should have been classified in the first place.
Okay, super helpful. So you might classify this under the category of fake news, but could you address the argument that the U.S. needs a stable supply of foreign oil?
Yeah, it needs energy. It's getting better and better, becoming self-sufficient with Mexico and Canada. So the fear was, going back to the 1970s, that it was very dependent on Persian Gulf oil. And the OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting States at the time, because of the war in Israeli war in the Middle East, cut off, hampered oil supplies in the United States, and that caused some problems. Mostly it caused the price to go up at the gas pump. Not exactly the end of the world, and a certain amount of inflation. It's not. It seems to me the United States is not only pretty close to being secure, but basically is likely to be moving in that direction in the future. I don't see it. I didn't think it was all that big a threat in the older days, but it seems to be a limited one now too. It's not clear that you can really put any country to the knees by cutting off the oil, particularly the United States.
Okay. You've mentioned ISIS and Al-Qaeda several times through your presentation and through the questions. One of the groups we hadn't talked very much about, that we have a question about, is how should the U.S. respond, how or if should the U.S. should respond to the conflicts or situations with Boko Haram?
Well, mostly it hasn't done anything. And if the United States had a magic bullet and can know how to deal with that, it'd be great to have it. It's basically a local problem. The Nigerian government seems to have it reasonably under control. Boko Haram is very much like ISIS in the sense it's self-destructive. I mean, kidnapping a whole bunch of girls, it's obviously a horrible thing, but it's really, really stupid if you want to win hearts and minds. You know, think of it in those. And so it's basically been killing itself off and is being squeezed back. Maybe the United States can help with some supplies, maybe can help with a certain amount of training. The issues probably would be mostly getting rid of corruption and getting Nigeria into a better condition in which it could basically govern itself and police itself. That's a very hard task. And the United States is trying to do that in Afghanistan with almost no success whatsoever. So much of the efforts, you know, there's tons of money got thrown at the situation in Iraq, and much of that went into Swiss bank accounts. And you know, people had CLs, all these $20 bills all over the place, or $50 bills, were being brought in by the pile, and they were looting them. And it's helped the corruption, or fed the corruption a lot that's happening. What they have to do is try to, and so if the United States could figure out how to solve that problem, they'd have to convince the locals that it's in their interest, and the locals have to carry it out, and it doesn't seem to be very easy. So it's not going to make much difference. And when it can't make much difference, it ought to consider the possibility of that maybe we shouldn't even try. And it should certainly take a very critical look as to where the money is going, is happening.
Right.
Let me give you one example of the corruption from this recent very good book on this on Afghanistan by Steve Coll, C-O-L-L. He points out that in Afghanistan, Afghan soldiers were starving to death in hospitals after they'd been wounded because the people in charge of the hospitals were stealing the money and not buying food for doctors in the hospital. You know, there are tons and tons of other stories like that. And how you can get that solved or even changed or even moved a bit is extraordinarily difficult. But in many respects, the United States is exacerbating the problem rather than reducing it.
Okay. Wow. Well, John, we have one final question. Are there any additional resources as our students are doing research? You mentioned the one just now, Steve Coll. Are there any others that you would suggest that they go out and take a look at?
Yeah, I mentioned before Mark Sageman. He spells the first name with the C, M-A-R-C, Sageman. He's really one of the best analysts, and he's certainly one of the longest term analysts of how terrorism works and what it means.
Okay.
2 books in the last few years. One is called Misunderstanding Terrorism, and also one just this year, or just late last year, called The Problem of Terrorism, or something like that. Okay. And it's a very long book, but the first and last chapter is really good. So I strongly recommend him. Another author who I admire greatly is a guy named Georges, G-E-R-G-E-S, Paulus Georges. He used to be in the United States, now he's at the London School of Economics. And he's written a number of books about Al-Qaeda, and he really understands, he's from Lebanon originally himself, and he really understands the situation there. He's interviewed the jihadists over the years. And over the years, his first book is called The Far Enemy, and is a real eye-opener for me. And I would suggest looking at his works, and not only that book, but several he's published since that time. So those
okay. Wow, that's super helpful. Our students really like to immerse themselves in content, from various sources to be able to really learn all that they can as they go into preparation and into the competition season for international terrorism. But John, thank you so much again for your time tonight. It was a delightful hour of lots of information, and I know our students are going to benefit significantly from that. So thank you to you and to the Bill of Rights for hosting tonight's webinar. We appreciate it.
Can I add one thing?
Absolutely.
Yeah, if you want to email me, and your expressions of outrage are included. My email address is very simple. It's 4Bs, BBBB, at Ohio State University, BBBB at osu.edu. Don't make it 3Bs because then it goes to the Better Business Bureau. If you do 4, I'll be glad to answer them. And if you have some questions about getting some readings or something, be glad to help if I can.
Okay.
It's a really good project.
That'll be fantastic. Our students, I am sure, will take advantage of that. So you may you may ultimately regret that, but our kids are super engaged and they love to ask questions and have conversation with you. So thank you again for sharing your expertise with us tonight, John.
Good luck to the group.
Thank you so much.
Yes,
those of you who were asking, go ahead, Natalia.
I was just going to say, I copied the email address in the chat box for those who were asking. But also note, all who attended this webinar, I will be sending out a follow-up email tomorrow that includes a list of all of the resources with links that John provided during this presentation. So hopefully that will be helpful for all of you as you continue to research. And yes, John, thank you so much for all of that information. Thank you even for extending that invitation with your personal email address. I am seeing a lot of questions here, people wanting to make sure that they get that. So I hope that you have some delightful continuing conversations there. And I hope that everyone has a wonderful evening. Thank you so much.